to rise to the throne of Spain. Ferdinand VII betrayed his own flesh and blood, his father, King Charles IV, aligning himself with the despot Napoleon Bonaparte. And this single act of disloyalty set the tone for Ferdinand's entire life. A lifetime of political and personal humiliations. He came to power during the Napoleonic Wars and soon gained the nickname the Desired One among the Spanish people, an ironic title since he had sided with the French against Spain. They pinned their hopes on Ferdinand and restoring their freedom, and ending 7 years of French occupation. But alas, he would disappoint them as well, especially when it came to his relationship with France. When Napoleon was defeated and sent into exile, Ferdinand returned to Spain in 1814, where he was greeted as a hero. In reality, he was no different than his idol, Napoleon, a power-hungry monarch more interested in crushing dissent than advancing liberty. Within days of his return, he had the liberal Constitution of 1812, which had been a symbol of Spanish freedom, rolled up and burned, establishing himself as an absolute monarch. He went on to rule like the god of a mythical, ancient kingdom, demanding total obedience and punishing any sign of opposition with a brutal efficiency. Thousands of liberals and dissidents were arrested and executed, earning Ferdinand a reputation as one of history's most cruel and vindictive tyrants. But if there was one thing that terrified Ferdinand more than criticism, it was his inability to produce a male heir. Every morning when he woke up, he believed he was cursed to fail. Every night he went to sleep believing he had failed again. In fact, his greatest fear, the fear that drove him mad and made him tremble before his courtiers, was not that he couldn't father a son, but that he wasn't man enough to do so. You see, Ferdinand's most prized possession was his manhood, which he believed was gigantic. It was the source of his self-worth, the justification for his tyrannical rule. If he wasn't a powerful monarch, he was a powerful lover. If he wasn't feared, he was desired. That is until he learned that his wife couldn't get pregnant. You might be wondering how a former lover of fortune could suddenly become so afraid of intimacy. Well, it has everything to do with his marriage. To secure a male heir, Ferdinand married Maria Antonia of Naples, a choice that left him unfulfilled. She was 20 years his junior, more interested in dancing and romance than ruling a kingdom. And though she bore him to children, both were girls, a fact that devastated Ferdinand. He had grown up hearing stories of his ancestors who produced heirs, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Philip III had 11 children. Charles V had 8. Ferdinand's grandfather, Philip V, had 10. And his great-grandfather, Charles II, had 9. All of these men were considered heroes. To have a large family meant that you were virile, strong, masculine. But now that he was king, it seemed his bloodline would die with him. When Maria Antonia suffered her first miscarriage, he didn't just blame her, he blamed himself. Was his giant schlong scaring the baby away? Was he too rough in bed? Had he damaged his tool in some way? Afraid of being ridiculed, he kept these questions to himself and his doctors. But secretly, he knew that the problem wasn't him. It was his wife. And sure enough, when she miscarried a second time, he ordered her put under house arrest, convinced that she was purposely ruining his life. To make matters worse, she was too young to be remarried. So Ferdinand found himself without a queen and without an heir. His advisors told him that he needed to find another wife, but he refused to listen. How could he trust another woman? What if she also proved to be barren? After a year of no babies, he began to suspect that the problem wasn't his wife, it was him. Or more specifically, it was the stress of having a difficult wife that had emasculated him. After all, what was a king without his power, his strength, his manhood? So when his second cousin, Maria Isabel of Portugal, became available, he married her immediately. Sure, she was 25 years older than his first wife and almost twice his age. But it didn't matter. He wanted a baby and she could give him one. Maria Isabel delivered a boy, but unfortunately he died at 2 months old. Then she had a girl, then another girl, and finally another stillborn son. With 3 dead children, Ferdinand had lost all hope. Once again, the blame fell on his wife, and he had her secluded in a palace wing, a prisoner in her own gilded cage. At this point, he was desperate. He tried everything to cure his alleged impotence, drinking potions made from herbs and the ground-up testicles of bulls, as well as other questionable substances. He took a potion every day for the rest of his life. It was rumored that he even wore a special belt to ward off evil spirits that might be haunting him. And in a last-ditch effort to save his bloodline, he visited the most holy shrines in Spain, begging God for a miracle. But his prayers weren't answered. His doctors assured him that nothing was wrong with him. His counselors warned him that he was making a fool out of himself. But Ferdinand's anxiety and his public humiliation continued. In 1818, Maria Isabel died while giving birth to a stillborn child. The whole country mourned, knowing that once again the king's line would die with him. To everyone's surprise, Ferdinand allowed himself to be seen in public, shedding tears and consoling the widow. He insisted on carrying the coffin to the hearse, and even rode behind it. It was the first time the world saw this normally stoic king break down. He was convinced that a curse had been placed upon him and his dynasty. So he remarried, this time to Maria Josepha of Saxony. Once again, he was looking for a miracle, but instead he got 2 daughters, Isabella and Luisa Fernanda. Devastated, he was forced to abolish the Salic law, which had traditionally prohibited women from inheriting the throne of Spain. This ignited a powder keg of political tension that erupted into the First Carlist Wars, a brutal conflict between rival factions that would rage for nearly a decade. Now, Ferdinand was already furious over his inability to produce a male heir. But now he was also angry at his counselors and advisors, who had tricked him into marrying yet another woman who had produced nothing but daughters. He felt like a puppet, dancing to the tune of his advisors and the whims of fate. By 1823, he had given up on ever having a son. So he remarried yet again, this time to Maria Cristina of the 2 Sicilies, who was not only young and beautiful, but also a lot like him, passionate, impulsive, and very headstrong. It looked like his luck was finally turning around when she became pregnant. But instead of 1 baby, she gave birth to 2, once again, a boy and a girl. And Ferdinand's troubles resumed. At this point, he was tired of crying, tired of blaming himself, tired of the pitying looks from his court. He was tired of being a king, tired of living in a palace, tired of his life. The rumors say that he would often be seen weeping uncontrollably in his chambers, trembling, overwhelmed by the weight of his own inadequacies. Even his doctors were baffled by this sudden turn of events. He had always been a vigorous man, full of energy. But now he couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs without collapsing. Though Ferdinand never admitted it, he knew he had been cursed to live out his days alone. Without a son to carry on his bloodline, without an heir to take his place. As his health deteriorated, so did his rule. He was an ineffectual and indecisive monarch, often swayed by his last advisor, a position held by his sister, Maria Louisa, who used her influence to enrich herself and her lovers. Ferdinand had lost all interest in politics, spending his days in bed watching old bullfights, drinking his secret concoction of herbs and animal parts. In fact, he liked the show so much that he had an arena built inside the palace walls, where he could enjoy the spectacle from his window without having to leave his room. While Ferdinand reveled in his fantasy world of bullfights and potions, Spain's vast colonial empire in the Americas was crumbling. One by one, its colonies broke free, declaring themselves independent republics. By the time Ferdinand died in 1833, he had lost almost all of Spain's colonial holdings. He was a broken man, haunted by his past, burdened by his present, and terrified of his future. When he died, there were no tears shed, no masses held, no monuments erected. For the Spanish people, he was a monster, a cruel, heartless tyrant. For his counselors, he was a weak, indecisive monarch. And for himself, Ferdinand was a failure, a man who had lost everything that mattered to him: his dignity, his power, and ultimately his life.